computer is picking up a strange signal. Here, sir, you better take a look at it.
Hi, and welcome to Sci-Fi Snacks. I'm Liz J. Bradley, a science fiction author and poet who adores short fiction and snacks. Each episode of Sci-Fi Snacks is a short and sweet, or salty, discussion of what I loved, what I learned, and what I snacked on while reading new-to-me short science fiction. As always, links to the short stories are in the show notes, so if you haven't read this week's story, head on over, pick up your favorite snack, and then join me as we discuss this week's story. Hello, and welcome to episode 10 of Sci-Fi Snacks with me, Liz Bradley, your host. Today, it is a dark and stormy afternoon as I record this. I don't think any of the thunder will be picked up on the recording, but let me tell you, it is like shaking and flashing, and it is so moody right now in the middle of the afternoon, so this is fun. I hope the weather is better wherever and whenever you are right now. This week, we are going to be talking about a story with a fabulous title called How It Feels to Be Swallowed by a Black Hole. And this was written by Gretchen Tessmer and appeared in Small Wonders magazine. Now, full disclosure, Small Wonders has published some of my own work, and I have been reading them for a while now. I really love kind of their editorial vision and their focus on short science fiction and fantasy and poetry. And this one comes from not the same issue that I'm in, but issue 22 from April of 2025. So this is a relatively new piece, and it's super fun. One of my favorite things about it, before we even get into the whole podcast, is just how well it caught my attention. When I go looking for stories, I'm reading lots of titles, general little snippets, maybe going off of, what I know about the magazine. And this one just had the best setup for almost like a clickbait title and tagline, not in a bad way. So not in the negative sense of clickbait where you're trying to trick me, because in the end, this story delivers. But what was really great is the preview text for this. The first line is set apart from the rest of it. So you get the title, How It Feels to Be Swallowed by a Black Hole, which, immediately piques my interest. And then the tagline in it is, the short answer is, not great. And I laughed out loud. I was like, that is so clever and so funny. And yeah, that probably tracks. So I really could not wait to read the rest of this story. We'll start with a little bit of an author bio and tell you about the story, and then we'll move into what I liked, what I learned, and what I snacked on this week. Gretchen Tessmer lives in the deep woods of the U.S.-Canadian borderlands. Her short stories and poems have been published in many places, including Nature, Beneath Ceaseless Skies, and fantasy and science fiction. Her poetry has been nominated for Riesling, Dwarf Stars, Best of the Net, and Pushcart prizes. So the story of How It Feels to Be Swallowed by a Black Hole is a really voicey, short view into the end of the world for this small crew who has found themselves over the edge of a black hole. What's interesting is this story is in present tense. So when we enter the story, we find out that this crew has gone over the edge of the black hole. They've gone too close. And so they're being pulled in, and we are there with them as they go over the edge. And our narrator is nameless at first, so we don't know who it is. has a great voice. This is a perfect example of kind of a literary voicey piece. If you're interested in developing your own voice or reading something that has a really strong voice, this is a great example of it. So we meet this crew. They're obviously at the end of their journey, and our main character is silent until we find that they turn to her for hope or for wisdom. We find out our main character comes from an alien race that they look like children, but they live very long lifespans. So they are trusted as secret keepers. They also cannot speak in the traditional vocal fashion. So our main character speaks through another character at that time and decides that instead of giving the crew the reality of the situation, the picture that they're all going to die, our main character decides to give them some words of hope and some words of wisdom. It's this really beautiful moment. And then you get this almost snarky voice, internal voice, this interiority from our main character that they don't know what's going to happen. And they're mad that this is how things have all turned out. And in the end, we find that they all are going to be consumed by this black hole. And they leave us with the line, "An eternity passes in just about 3 minutes." And what's really special about this piece is it doesn't take you that much more time to read than what we have. So it's this present tense, in the moment experience that we have along with these characters. Now, I have not introduced my snack for this yet. I was so excited at the start for this because there is a term, it's not used in this story, but it's called spaghettification. And yes, that is the scientific term. I heard it in a documentary. Real scientists naming things the best way that they do. If you were to enter a black hole, it's called spaghettification because you end up getting stretched and pulled down into like spaghetti, literally. And what I thought was really interesting is in this story, they turn that on its head and they say, we expected more stretching. And then we set that aside for the sake of the story. But for the sake of the snack, I wanted some sort of spaghettified snack. Now, unfortunately, this was the worst snack I have had, definitely on this podcast, possibly ever. I was so excited. I read a blog post. They had these weird little tiny spaghetti things at a bar that were like pretzels, but they were the size of spaghetti. And they were like, what is this? And it turns out that you could make spaghetti noodles into pretzel by frying it up in oil and then adding sugar and salt. And I was like, this is perfect. I've got all of that at home. I can make it. And if this is a good snack, like how fun. You can have your own like spaghetti pretzels. So I followed the recipe to a T because I have learned my lesson that when you're making something for the first time, you need to follow the directions. I am not someone who likes to follow recipes or directions in my normal course of cooking. Even in baking, I like to change things. But this time I was like, no, it's for the podcast. I don't want to mess it up because I'm dumb and made a silly mistake or decided that I could. It's like the story that you read on messaging boards where somebody went to make carrot cake, but carrots have too much sugar, so I made it with kale and 1 star, this is a terrible recipe. No, we were not having a kale swapped for carrots issue on this podcast. So I followed all the directions. I even used the good olive oil to do the frying of the spaghetti sticks in and everything. And then I went to try them and they smelled so good. I don't know. I've never fried a pasta before in oil. You fry the uncooked pasta. So I watched the video. I made sure I was following the directions. You snap the spaghettis in half. Okay. I will say, I take it back. I did not follow every single step. In the video, the woman took a knife and was cutting each spaghetti singularly to cut them in half so that they would fit in her frying pan. And I was like, that's too much. And so I just took a handful of spaghetti and just snapped them in my hands because I don't need a knife to break spaghetti. So I didn't follow that. But I don't think that's why it turned out terrible. In the end, smelled really good, put the sugar on there, put the salt. I used nice, like flaky kosher salt. I was so excited, tossed it all together. And then I took the first one and it hits my tongue and I was like, ooh, this tastes good. And then I tried to chew it. And the texture of the spaghetti, like, never changed. I don't know. And I cooked it till it was the right color and all of that. And it was just like I was eating raw pasta with a nice, like, coating of oil, sugar, and salt, which I love me some oil, sugar, and salt, but I don't like raw pasta. Like raw dried pasta, not even the nice fresh type. No, I was chewing on toothpicks and it was terrible. And then I said, maybe it's just me. So I turned to my kids and my kids love to eat raw pasta. Don't ask. I don't know why, but they do. My son tried it and he said it was bad. He might have just been feeding off of my energy. I don't know, but total fail for the snack. I ate them in the 3 minutes or so that it took me to read this story, but then I threw the rest out because it was just an epic fail. An epic fail is really a good way to describe what happens to this crew in this story. Something that you come across in science fiction all the time is the fear of black holes and these big gravity wells, and you always have it where somehow the crew is saved through some sort of ingenious moment where everything turns around for them and they escape the black hole. And then there's the school of science fiction thought where, okay, we're going to use the black holes and we'll go through them and they're portals. And I wrote a short story that I've got out on submission that you go through the black hole and it ends up spitting you out what's called a white hole in a different dimension or galaxy or whatever. So there's lots of schools of thought, but I thought it was a really unique take to examine that moment after we've already been pulled in. And there's this sense of we're no longer in control. This is it. This is the rest of everything. And what I really loved about it was there's this beautiful description of what it looks like from inside the black hole, looking up at the lip as it pulls in stars. And we've got scientific backing on this, so you know what a black hole looks like. You can go on and Google we were able to get a picture of a black hole and you see it by seeing what's around it, what it's consuming, all of this light in a circle as it pulls stars into it. And it's really beautiful. And this story let us see from the inside what that looked like and tied it to this really beautiful kind of emotional arc of our main character who can't speak aloud, but expresses themselves in such a beautiful way with this interiority. Another thing that I really loved about this piece was how clear we got these snapshots of all of the different crew members, and no one felt generic. One of the difficult things in building a crew or a group or having a piece of writing, it happens a lot in science fiction because you have a spaceship crew. You can see it in fantasy with pirates. So you've got all these people on the crew where you get a lot of kind of generic pirate A and pirate B, or they're 100% of their characters based on just their job on board, and they aren't unique. And what I really loved in this was, first of all, it wasn't a human-first, human-centric group of people. We had humans, yes, but they weren't the majority. It wasn't like we had a crew of 7 humans with 1 alien thrown in for diversity's sake. No, this was, even in such a short piece, we had these beautiful snapshots of these alien races and even these humans who had such personality and had such a unique feel and vibe to them based on how they were described. And I love that happened in such a short space. That can be really difficult to pull off. One of my favorite lines from this came from the communications officer who commented, "Perception and reality are two different things." And that was a moment where I just stopped. I love the nuance behind that. And this piece was just full of really beautiful lines like that. I think the shorter your piece is, the more important it is to have the prose on a line level be really thought-provoking and beautiful in of itself. And I think that this piece did that so well. And so that was just beautiful that as they were talking about the concept of how time is different within a black hole, that time slows down, but also outside of the black hole, the time is going to be completely different. And is it 3 minutes or is it an eternity? And it all wrapped together nicely in this beautiful swirl, like a black hole, of beautiful prose and character interactions and this interiority from our main character, that when it ended with an eternity passes in just about 3 minutes, it just felt like a bow on the end of the story. And I really loved that. It wasn't a story about overcoming and survival. They were already gone, but they still were there and still had to persist through that. And so I thought it was a really beautiful way to position a story. And one of the things that I learned with this is a reminder of the long life that short stories can have. So this is a short piece, but it actually is a reprint. I didn't know this until I got to the bottom and I saw the note that it was first published in Nature Futures in 2018. And what's really cool, Nature Futures, if you've never heard of it, Nature is a huge science magazine, one of the top real science, not science fiction, but they have a section called Futures. And that is their fiction section where you can take something from the magazine, from a previous issue, from current science, extrapolate on it. And I really wonder if this came from that time of this fascination with black holes. And I just thought that was really cool to think that you go out and you publish something, and I know I feel this way. I feel like, oh, I published it, I hit the goal, it's done. You know, check it off the list, moving on. But this story reminded me that your stories can find new life in new magazines. The people who read Nature Futures are not going to be the same people who read Small Wonders magazine, maybe. So you're going to get new readers, and you can keep not recycling these pieces. And that makes it feel almost negative, but it is a reuse, a new life. We're breathing new life into these short pieces as they can be sold to different markets. And I think that's just a good reminder for someone like me who's at the beginning of my journey in publication, that even if something has been published, it doesn't mean that I have to be done with it or that it's found all of its audiences. And maybe I need a spreadsheet to look at reprints and things like that. I should probably keep track. So that was a good little learning moment for me here. On a literary level, what I really wanted to pay attention to with this story is this mismatch that I talked about in another episode when we talked about On the Night Shift, of an event that seems huge. In this case, they're dying. They're in a black hole. They are in the last 3 minutes or eternity of their lives, depending on your perspective. So that's a huge thing. And you could really write some dramatic fiction around that premise. But with that premise, we're then presented with this almost lyrical, quiet story that's very introspective and not the first knee-jerk reaction to this topic. And I think that's something that I like to think about when I'm doing contest pieces or themes from a prompt. I can think of several right now that I'm working on, that I'm thinking on. Usually when you're given a prompt, I know I have that first initial reaction of, oh, this is what that story. If the theme is regret, this is a story about regret. And I think that when you go with that first initial gut reaction, it's not necessarily the wrong choice, but it needs to be mined. It needs to go deeper. It needs to maybe be looked at in a different way. So we're not looking at the black hole from the outside, we're looking from the inside. This isn't about the moment where we cross over onto the accretion disk. That has already happened. So it's that new, fresh perspective that gets people to think that makes your story special. So taking that extra moment, brainstorming a list. I love to brainstorm. It's something that I think because when I was younger, I was in an organization called Odyssey of the Mind, and we were rewarded for outside of the box thinking in competition form. So you would literally get points for creative answers to questions. And it became my mission to be the most outside the box thinker, to get the extra points every time. And so I like to approach my writing the same way, where if I'm given a theme, I want to think of 10 different stories that I could write and keep looking at it and attacking it from different directions. And I think I'm always going to think of this story now when I'm going through that process. Am I looking at it from outside the black hole or from inside the black hole? Can we do something that I haven't seen done before? And the last thing that I really want to take away from this story is the really interesting choice of choosing the narrator as someone who cannot speak in this story. We have a whole crew of people that could have been the main character here. And they would all tell different stories. They would all tell different versions of this story. We have our navigator and our pilot who are bickering and fighting, and they're lovers but enemies. And their story, their version of events in this story would be so different than what we got from Lisa Child, our main character, our narrator, who needs to take extra steps to actually speak. So they're very observant. They're also a lot older than everyone. I think something like 67 years older than the oldest person on board. So we're getting this really unique perspective. It would really scare me to write because I know I lean on dialogue so much, and there's not a lot of it in this piece. We've got, I think, one line from the narrator and then a few here and there from the other crewmates, and then the rest of it is just interiority and narrative. And I think that was a really cool choice. I think that you can play with that very intentionally, and I would love to explore that in future writing of mine. So, in the end, the snack may have been a complete failure and not at all what I expected. But the story was amazing. It was also not at all what I expected, but in a good way. So, we have a snack fail and an amazing story. Make sure you check out the show notes so that you can get a link to read this online. And you can check out other stories that Gretchen Tessmer has written right there on Small Wonders magazine. I'm telling you, I don't talk about it on this show, but See You on the Other Side has the same amazing voice as How It Feels to Be Swallowed by a Black Hole. We've got next week's story down in the show notes if you want to get a jump on that. And I cannot wait to chat with you again. Thanks so much for listening, and happy snacking.